The time was 3:47 a.m. local, and a situation deemed impossible was unfolding over Russian airspace. 4 objects were closing in on Moscow at 380 kilometers per hour, completely undetectable by the planet's most advanced air defense network. Their very existence was a paradox. The S-400 radar operator near Ryazan stared at his display, observing what appeared to be a large flock of birds. Yet, birds do not maintain perfect formation,
1,000 kilometers
nor
away
do they
in
fly
Russia's
directly
Lenin,
toward
the single
Russia's largest
facility
oil
refines
refinery.
6% of Russia's
Precisely
oil.
at 52 kilometers from the target, and 27 kilometers from the S-400 battery, the lead beaver drone executed an abrupt climb to 800 meters. The intercept missile required 27 seconds to reach that altitude. However, operating on emergency power, the drones could enter the 2-kilometer dead zone in 41 seconds. This left the battery commander with only 14 seconds to assess if the incoming contacts represented a genuine threat or decoys. His rapid decision-making process was defined by the immediate trade-offs. Each missile represented a $2 million expenditure. Time remaining, 10 seconds. The closure rate was a confirmed reality. 7 seconds. Training mandated waiting for positive identification. 5 seconds. Despite the protocol, the threat calculation mandated immediate engagement. 2 48 N6DM interceptors roared from their canisters, reaching Mach 6 in 3 seconds. Instantly, the drones executed a sharp dive back to 200 meters, vanishing below the radar horizon. The core technical failure rested in the missile guidance system. It relied on semi-active radar homing, requiring continuous ground station illumination of the target. Without the radar energy paint, the missiles were rendered blind. The commander watched his screen as his interceptors attempted to extrapolate the target's trajectory based solely on the last known position. The warheads detonated 80 meters above the drone's previous altitude. The 180-kilogram fragmentation warheads released 24,000 steel fragments into empty air, an insufficient proximity to be effective. The refinery's final defensive layer, 2 Pantsir S-1 batteries, had 17 seconds to acquire and engage. The Pantsir's 1RS-21E radar operates on the UHF and EHF bands, optimized for larger aerial targets. Against the 0.1 square meter radar cross-section of the drones at 8 kilometers, the signal return was barely distinguishable from background noise. 12 seconds remained. The operators saw intermittent, flickering contacts. 8 seconds. They attempted to slew the 2 A-38M cannons, but the hydraulic traverse required 3.2 seconds to rotate 180 degrees.
Receiver tracks
4
both
seconds.
GPS
The
and
lead
GLONASS
beaver had already
satellites
locked onto its
simultaneously.
target.
If
The
American
warhead struck at
satellites say you're
3:52
here,
in 17
but
seconds. This was merely the first impact. 3 subsequent beavers hit 3 more targets in rapid succession. The resulting cascade consumed 140,000 tons of petroleum. Within 90 seconds, the entire western section was an inferno, reaching 1,200 degrees Celsius. The fire would burn for 72 hours, cutting Moscow's fuel supply by 40%. 470 kilometers away, 12 more drones approached their objective. At the Novoy Kuybyshev refinery, the Russian Defense Forces believed they were prepared. They were not. While the initial strikes were still in progress, the Pantsir S-1 batteries had been tracking the incoming formation for 11 minutes. 3 batteries were deployed in a triangular configuration, ensuring overlapping fields of fire. Each 1RS-21E radar could track 20 targets and engage 4 simultaneously up to 20 kilometers. The battery commanders, having studied previous Ukrainian tactics, were confident the drones would not reach their target. At 4:03 a.m., an anomaly occurred. 4 of the 12 drones abruptly climbed to 1,500 meters, fully exposing themselves. The radar classification system immediately emitted a priority alert. The radar return signatures had undergone a transformation. The aspect ratio, speed, and radar frequency response now matched the profile of KH-101 cruise missiles. The climbing drones had deployed corner reflectors, triangular aluminum devices engineered to produce retroreflection. When struck by radar, the signal was bounced back with 180-degree amplification. A 10-centimeter reflector could convincingly mimic the radar return of a 10-square-meter object. The Pantsir's computer-registered cruise missiles, precisely the intent of the decoys. The lead battery commander had 2 seconds to decide. The standing engagement protocol was clear. Cruise missiles were always priority targets. His training took over. 8 57E6 missiles launched within 12 seconds, each accelerating to 1,300 meters per second. The missiles utilized command guidance for the initial 18 kilometers before switching to semi-active homing. However, the cruise missiles began executing 9G turns, an aerodynamic impossibility for a KH-101, which disintegrates at 3Gs. The targets began to multiply. 4 became 8.
Blind.
8 became
the missile's
16.
Auto-protection
The
triggers
operational
and they
reality was that each climbing drone was dropping reflectors at 2-second intervals. The radar interpreted these falling reflectors as new targets while the original drones descended. $3 million worth of missiles were pursuing aluminum foil costing less than a daily cup of
Someone
coffee.
had been dragging,
The
suddenly
fate of the
begins
other
to
8
race.
drones was
The drones
revealed from the
rapidly
sector
close the
behind the
distance
main
to their
defense.
target.
While attention was focused on the high-altitude fireworks, 8 UJ-22s had approached undetected from the opposite direction at an altitude of only 50 meters. This exploited the Panzer's crucial fatal weakness. Its phased array radar is fixed. It can electronically steer the beam 45 degrees left or right. But turning to face the rear required physically rotating the entire 3,000-kilogram turret, a process that took 4.7 seconds. The commander's shouted order to traverse now was too late. The drones were already inside 1.2 kilometers. The 57 E-6 missiles require 1.5 seconds to arm their proximity fuses after launch. At this range, they would impact before arming. Only the twin 30mm cannons remained. The two A-38M guns opened fire, each barrel cycling 2,500 rounds per minute. The fire control computer calculated the lead angle, which, for a perpendicular crossing at 200 kilometers per hour, was 31 meters. But the UJ-22s were programmed for this exact countermeasure. Every 2 seconds, they executed dynamic altitude variation, making random changes between 40 and 80 meters using barometric altimeters. The Panzer's fire control system relied on predictive targeting, calculating where the target would be in 0.8 seconds when the rounds arrived. With random altitude changes, prediction degraded to probability. The hit probability plummeted from 83 to 31%. One drone flew directly into the cannon stream and was disintegrated 300 meters from impact. But 7 broke through. 3 of them struck the target. The third wave of attack followed immediately. All 3 Panzer batteries were reloading. The 57 E-6 missiles are stored in tubes beneath the turret. The automatic loader extracts spent tubes, refreshes fresh missiles, and rams them into launch position. This required 90 seconds of complete vulnerability. The refinery sustained 3 more direct hits. The Ukrainian planners had calculated every second, exploiting the precise moment the Russian forces would be defenseless. At the next target, Russia had deployed an element the Ukrainians had not yet identified. At 4:18 a.m., 6 UJ-26. Beavers approaching Voronezh suddenly went blind. GPS signals were lost, communication ceased, and navigation screens displayed only static. A Krasuka 4 electronic warfare vehicle had just become active. The system was not utilizing ordinary jamming. The Krasuka 4 flooded the electromagnetic spectrum from 0.1 to 18 GHz with 500 watts of directed power. To contextualize, GPS signals transmit at 0.025 watts from satellites 20,000 kilometers away. The Krasuka's jamming was literally 5 quadrillion times stronger than the GPS signal. The drones automatically switched to inertial navigation using their gyroscopes. However, these gyroscopes drift at 10 degrees after flying 380 kilometers for 68 minutes. The accumulated error meant they could miss by 200 meters, leading to mission failure. The drone was now in full crisis mode. At 95 degrees Celsius, the processor began thermal throttling, reducing clock speed. Slower processing translated to fewer pattern matches per second. The drone initiated emergency load shedding. Navigation lights off 2 watts saved. Telemetry transmitter off 5 watts saved. Radar warning receiver off 3 watts saved. Every watt saved meant 0.5 degrees cooler. And every degree meant 100 megahertz faster processing. 30 seconds to impact. No pattern match was achieved. The algorithm was failing. 20 seconds. Processor at 98 degrees. 10 seconds. Thermal shutdown was imminent. 8 seconds. The pattern locked. Not on the storage tanks themselves, their shadows were useless, but on the unique geometric relationship created by 3 tanks. The intersection of their shadows formed a triangle with specific angles that remained constant. Tank 7 was identified with 4 meters to spare. The solution, however, was trapped within a single drone's computer. The Krasuka's jamming rendered communication impossible. The lead beaver attempted a desperate measure: frequency hopping spread spectrum. transmitting across 1,000 different frequencies per second in a pseudo-random pattern. The Krasuka could not jam all frequencies simultaneously with equal power. On channel 847 for 1 microsecond, a gap appeared. The drone transmitted 128 bytes, just GPS coordinates and impact timing. The other 5 drones received the fragment via match filtering and adjusted their course. Tank 7 took the first hit at 4:20 a.m. The warhead struck precisely where steel met concrete, the weakest point due to differential thermal expansion. The fuel lake ignited. The Krasuka 4 crew watched the wall of fire advance at 30 meters per second. They abandoned their $20 million vehicle and fled. As the jamming cleared, 8 more drones appeared on radar screens, heading for Russia's most heavily defended military target. The Russians were about to learn that impossible was simply the Ukrainian description for a challenge accepted. Primorsko-Akhtarsk military airfield was a fortress. 4 Tor M2 air defense vehicles were positioned in a perfect diamond formation with 5-kilometer spacing. Each sector provided overlapping coverage with no gaps. 2 Su-35 fighters circled overhead at 8,000 meters. Every radar search, track, and fire control was active. The base commander had positioned his defenses using computer modeling, confident that 8 drones against this configuration meant a guaranteed shootdown. But the Ukrainians knew something the Russians did not. The 8 UJ-22s were not flying straight. This serpentine pattern, technically termed sinusoidal trajectory variation, was fuel-intensive, adding 8% to the flight distance and burning 4.3 extra liters. The reason was tactical. The Tor M2 uses command guidance with predicted intercept points. Each weave forced a recalculation. The fire control computer's Kalman filtering assumed consistent behavior. Random weaving introduced process noise, which compounded small errors. By missile launch, the accumulated error could reach 50 meters. Exactly at 4:32 a.m., all 4 Tor M2 systems fired simultaneously. 16 9M38 missiles, powered by solid rocket motors producing 4,000 kilograms of thrust, accelerated to Mach 2.5. The missiles used 3-stage guidance, inertial for the first 2 seconds, command guidance until 2 kilometers from the target, then active radar for terminal homing. Their trajectories formed a kinematic engagement box. No escape. 10 seconds until impact. The missiles were closing at 850 meters per second. 9 seconds. Terminal guidance activated. 8 seconds. The seekers acquired their targets. Then, the impossible happened. The UJ-22s went vertical. Not a gentle climb, but a 6G pull-up that took them from 180 meters to 1,200 meters in 4 seconds. The missiles attempted to follow but could not. The 9M38 uses aerodynamic control with 4 canards. At the required climb angle of 76 degrees, the canards stalled. Stall meant airflow separation from the control surface, no airflow, no control. The missile's thrust vector control could only compensate for 12 degrees. They sailed harmlessly below, except for one. Its proximity fuse detected the infrared signature above the drone's 180-degree exhaust at 400 degrees Celsius. The warhead detonated, launching 3,500 tungsten cubes in a directed pattern. The drone was disintegrated. But that spectacular interception served a purpose. Every eye, every radar, and every weapon was focused upward. No one saw what was approaching from the sea. 4 UJ-26 Beavers crossed the beach 15 seconds later, having flown 700 kilometers over the Sea of Azov at an altitude of just 5 meters. For 2 hours, they had used radar altimeters to maintain height above the waves. The ocean route ensured zero radar coverage. Ground-based radar cannot see beyond the horizon, and the horizon at 5 meters is only 8 kilometers. The Shahed storage hangars were completely undefended. Inside Hangar 2, 30 Shahed 136 drones sat in maintenance cradles. Each Shahed carried a warhead with 40 kilograms of composition C4 explosive and 50 liters of fuel. This amounted to 200 kilograms of explosive, plus 1,500 liters of fuel in a 40 square meter space, 10 times the NATO standard for ammunition storage. The first Beaver struck Hangar 2's roof. The hangar did not explode, it launched. It reached 50 meters altitude before gravity reclaimed it. Hangar 3 followed 1.3 seconds later. Hangar 4 followed. In 45 seconds, over 200 Shaheds, valued at $6 million, were vaporized. The base commander ordered an emergency scramble, but the runway was obscured by smoke from the burning drone fuel. Visibility was 150 meters. The minimum for Su-35 takeoff was 200 meters. Russia's primary Shahed base at Akhtarsk was eliminated. The longest shot was still to come, but this time, the drones would face something they could not outmaneuver. At 4:44 a.m., two modified UJ-26 Beavers reached Penza, 630 kilometers inside Russian territory. This was beyond the standard Beaver range of 350 kilometers. The modification was ingenious. Auxiliary fuel tanks in the warhead bay, sacrificing 5 kilograms of explosive, reducing the warhead from 20 to 15 kilograms, but gaining 12 liters of fuel. This extended the range to 980 kilometers with 30 minutes reserve. Unknown to them, an Su-35 had been hunting for 20 minutes. The pilot was following close behind. His E-scan radar in narrow beam mode, 10 degrees scan at 20 kilowatts power. This concentrated energy for maximum detection range against the 0.1 square meter drones. He achieved a solid track at 43 kilometers. The Beavers possessed no defensive measures. No chaff, no flares, no jammers. The pilot selected two R-77 missiles and fired. These missiles utilize active radar homing with their own Argus 9B2 seekers. Once launched, they are completely autonomous. The pilot fired at 18 kilometers and immediately executed a 180-degree turn. The R-77s accelerated to Mach 4 using solid rocket motors, covering 18 kilometers in 13.2 seconds. At 12 kilometers, the seekers went active. Each seeker could track targets pulling up to 12 Gs. The drones could manage 6 Gs maximum, but they could perform barrel rolls while varying altitude between 150 and 250 meters. The goal was to generate angular velocity exceeding the missile's control response. The R-77's control system updated 100 times per second, but the drones were changing direction at 150 degrees per second. This resulted in gimbal lock. The seeker physically could not rotate fast enough to maintain lock. The first R-77's proximity fuse triggered at 80 meters. Hundreds of 8mm tungsten balls, traveling at 2,100 meters per second, perforated the Beaver's fuselage. Control surfaces locked at random angles. Half the vertical stabilizer was gone, but the engine continued running. The second missile scored a direct impact, converting one Beaver into aluminum confetti, but its damaged wingman wobbled onward. The flight computer calculated impact in 40 seconds. The current trajectory would miss Building 3 by 40 meters unless an immediate change occurred. Final 3 seconds. Maximum thrust pulse. 30 meters off target. 20 meters. 10 meters. Impact occurred at 04:46 hours. The Beaver crashed through the roof at 73 meters per second. Under normal circumstances, 15 kilograms of explosive would not devastate an industrial building. However, semiconductor fabrication facilities were different. The clean room's air filters, designed for 0.3 micron particles, were instantly overwhelmed by millions of concrete and metal fragments. The electron beam lithography system, worth $47 million and requiring 18 months to install and calibrate, was destroyed. The ion implantation equipment was vaporized. 6 months of military processor inventory became silicon dust. Russian military chip production was paralyzed for a minimum of 6 months. Within 6 hours, Russia would begin the largest air defense redeployment of the war. Each system protecting refineries created gaps in battlefield coverage. Each gap meant Ukrainian HIMARS would operate freely. Ukraine had spent $412,000 on drones to inflict tens of millions of dollars in damage. The true victory, however, was not monetary. It was psychological. If Ukrainian drones could reach Penza, 630 kilometers from the border, they could reach anywhere,